Ya vamos empezando. Gracias, Flor. Bienvenidos de vuelta. La última sesión pudieron vivir la aplicación del simulador. Sé que fue bastante retador, pero estimulante también, ¿no? Tuvimos algunos equipos que lograron ese 60% de movilización del cambio. Así que felicitaciones, igual para todos, ¿no? Estamos para seguir aprendiendo. En esta oportunidad, Denis, que nos acompaña, muchísimas gracias, Denis, por siempre acompañarnos en estos procesos de desarrollo de capacidades, de aprender, de reflexionar. Va a liderar la sesión número 3 y nos estaría quedando pendiente una cuarta sesión, que es el día de mañana, ¿no? Hoy día Denis tiene un contenido relevante que es específico o digamos es como nuevo para este nivel organizacional. Y también, si mal no estoy, ahí corrígeme Denis, vamos a tener un pequeño espacio para que preparen un resumen que mañana van a estar compartiendo con algunos ejecutivos, directores de la compañía, sobre sus aprendizajes de estos días, ¿sí? Así que sin más, Denis, welcome. The class is...
Brit,
Sí,
hola.
Marga.
Lo único que diría es, de verdad, no es publicidad política pagada, pero me uní intencionalmente porque he visto el material ya en otros cohorts y cada vez que lo veo me encanta, lo entiendo más, lo aprendo más, así que solo para mencionar un poquito de verdad lo relevante principalmente en estos momentos de pronto de grandes cambios, ¿no? Y de pronto donde tendremos que ajustarnos por todo el contexto político en el que tenemos y donde nuestra capacidad de cambio tiene que ser un poco más, no sé si más ágil o no lo sé, pero quería mencionar solo eso porque realmente es bastante relevante.
Buenísimo, Marga, muchísimas gracias y totalmente de acuerdo.
All right. Thanks, both. Well, apparently, like Britt said, you cannot get rid of me. I'm going to keep coming back all the time. You should have your translation button at the bottom if you want to catch Spanish or if you want to practice your English. And then we'll be going through for the next couple of hours, the next few hours, we're going to be talking about how do we lead the most difficult change? How do we help people through the really difficult change? And then as Britt said, I'm going to make sure we keep a good 20 minutes at the end for you to get into some small groups. And so you have some time built into this session to prepare for tomorrow. And in that, we're going to talk about personal change. And then at the end of this session, you're going to have time to think about your playbook. And how is it that you'll lead going forward differently? What are some of the small things that you think will be critical that we do, the way we act, the way we think about change? But we'll have a little bit of time to prepare today. You have a little bit of time tomorrow, and then we'll have a conversation tomorrow in that wrap-up session. So does anybody remember this guy, Charles Darwin? Does anybody remember the quote that he is most famous for? And if you want to use the chat, let me get the chat open for me. Does anybody remember what Charles Darwin was most noted for? What quote do people remember him for?
Creo que dijo, las especies más fuertes no son las que sobreviven, sino aquellas que se adaptan, que evolucionan.
Hector, you're a born professor. Excellent. So thanks. Thanks also, Oliver. Yeah, evolutionary biology was the field that he was a pioneer in. And a lot of people believe he said only the strongest survive. And the point that I want to lead off with, the point that I want to start with was that is exactly not what he said. What he did say is what you said, Hector. And that is, it's not the strongest that survives or the smartest. It's the ones that are the most adaptive. And so we're going to be talking about these principles of adaptive change, adaptive leadership, And they are based in principles of evolutionary biology. And so when we're talking through this, you'll hear me use examples and metaphors for biology, because whether the system is a person and your body adapting, or whether it's an organization, there are some interesting common features. So our conversation is predicated on a couple of ideas. I'm going to walk you through two conversations. We're going to get into two breakouts and have you make some distinctions about what kind of hard change you're facing. And then we're going to talk about how we tackle it. But the first thing I want to talk about is just how this unfolds. So the idea that we thrive, that we have a capacity to thrive and adapt, says first thing we do is that we separate the precious from the expendable. We don't get rid of things that work well. And often when we look at large system change, we believe that there is a dramatic amount of change going on at Alicorp. It's like everything is changing. But the fact is, it is rarely the case that more than 20 to 25% of a system changes, even under the most dramatic circumstances. 70 to 75%, up to 80% of the organization largely stays the same. The way we've done things stays the same. It feels like more, but it's rare that more than 20% of the story actually changes, and that's a great deal. So one is change always feels bigger than it probably is in reality. And second, the way that we incorporate difficult change is we take smart risks and we do experiments, and I'm going to talk some more about that. So how do you create those next practices? It will be through experimentation, a little bit of trial and error, and then we integrate those next practices into the way we work, right? We assess it, we have a disciplined process for incorporating them. Very, very simple model to think about this. Now, when we're talking, in fact, here's the story we're going to walk through. We're going to talk about how do we get on the balcony and identify adaptive challenges. And I'm going to make a distinction between adaptive challenges and technical challenges, because we face both. And oftentimes we love to frame our challenges as technical because we're experts and we like to solve them through expertise. We're going to distinguish those two. And then we're going to get into a breakout and have you talk about challenges that you face and what kind they are. Then we're going to talk about how do you navigate the corporate immune system. The corporate immune system, every system likes equilibrium. Every system likes to keep things the same. So anytime we bring new ideas, new thinking, new processes in, the system comes out, the immune system comes out and tries to kill them off. So we're going to talk about how do you navigate the natural reaction of a system to change, and how do we regulate the distress that creates when we try new things. And then we'll talk about some of the advanced skills in part 3, which is what happens when people don't embrace new change? What happens when they keep reverting to the old way of doing things? How do we see it coming? And then what can we do about it? So that's kind of our conversation over the next couple of hours. And here is the definition that I want to start with. And so I can't see everybody's face, but some people love this definition, some people don't. But the definition of adaptive leadership and adaptive change is the ability to disappoint people at a rate that they can absorb. It's the ability to disappoint the people that work for you at a rate that they can absorb. And so here, it sounds a little bit funny or a little bit tragic, but the point is this: there are people that work for you that would step in front of a bus for you. They would do anything for you. They're very committed to you as a leader, and they're going to have to get to someplace new, and they're not going to like it. They're going to have to do things different. They're going to have to behave in different ways. They're going to have to try new ways of working, and it's going to be difficult for them. So how do we help move them through, these highly committed people, so that they don't disengage or check out? That's the hard change that we're talking about. All right. So let's start with that first chapter. The first chapter is how do we get on the balcony and name the adaptive challenge. Many of us are pretty comfortable on the dance floor. We like being down on the floor because that's where all the action is. That's where the swirl is happening. That's where mostly what you can see are the people near to you. The first challenge for us as leaders is get on the balcony. Because on the balcony is where you can see the patterns. What are the patterns and the people? What are they doing? And it is only with a little bit of distance and perspective that you can take a look at what's happening there rather than just reacting to what's happening next to you. And so if we can get on the balcony, we can start generating hypotheses about what's just hard work and what is really new about this challenge. We can also think about the true meanings of things. How are people really feeling? What is it that they're saying and what does it really mean? And here, under the most difficult challenges, one of our key skills is trying to figure out what's not being said. What is it people are not saying? So in my experience, people don't resist change, they resist loss. And some of you have heard me say this. And if we can't articulate the felt sense of loss that someone feels like they're experiencing in a really hard change, then we don't quite have it. We don't quite know what's not being said. And so there's always a felt sense of loss. And if we can't describe it exactly, then we probably don't quite understand the true feelings behind. Where's the resistance coming from? Why is this difficult? It's because we haven't expressed clearly to others what they are feeling they're losing and dealt with it directly. So idea one is get on the balcony. And then importantly, as you think about the challenges that you face, we need to distinguish whether it's a technical challenge or an adaptive challenge. On the left are technical challenges. The problem definition is clear. The solution is known. It may be hard work, but it's known. If we're rolling out a new piece of software, if we're trying a new product code, if we are working a new change management model, a new lean process, those are technical challenges where the definition of what we're trying to do is clear, the solution is known, and it will be arrived at, we'll get to the answer through expertise. And I want to contrast that to an adaptive challenge. So on the right, an adaptive challenge is not something we know. It requires us to learn. It's going to require us to experiment and try and then learn from our experiments. And it will never be solved through expertise. It is always going to be an act of will, that is leadership. The leaders have to take a risk, or through stakeholders, because adaptive challenges rarely stay within a single silo, a single function, or a single geography. They always have implications beyond what you think the problem definition is. And so as you're thinking about a personal change challenge that you have, let's start thinking about what elements of it are technical and solved through expertise, but what elements of it are adaptive and are going to require us to learn some things and try some things. At your level, you will have both. Nobody just brings you technical problems anymore. You're going to have both types. And so technical problems, it's work we know how to do. It's largely delivered through our current expertise in the company. We know how to measure success, and it's complicated and it's difficult, but it doesn't disorient us. It's not confusing. People may be central to the solution, but they may not be, right? It could be a systems change, could be a lot of different things, but it may not be that people are central to the solution of the problem. And ownership is always clear. There's always an owner who owns a decision for the technical issue at hand. Now on the right, when it's adaptive, it's a little bit more confusing. People are more emotionally engaged in the topic, and almost always the people with the problem are part of the problem. The people that are having the most difficulty are also the people that have to change a great deal as well. And again, as I said, ownership will happen across lines of authority. And so it will take several people, it'll take collaboration, and it'll take more collective work to solve. So that should be enough of a way for you to start thinking about which elements of my challenge are more technical or more adaptive. And so here's what I'd like you to do. We're going to get into this first breakout for around 15 minutes, Flora. And I'd like you to think about this. Think about a challenge that you're in the middle of that is either change work that you're doing or that you're about to start, that it's really important. And the questions to discuss are, where do I look to find out what's not being said? What are some of the underlying kinds of issues that are surfacing in my change element? And which parts of it are adaptive and which parts feel more technical? Are there some parts that are just unclear? They're going to require experimentation. We don't know how to do it. And can I actually name those? Let's just start with those two. So Flor, when you're ready, let's get folks into a quick conversation and talk about how will you look for what's not being said? Do I understand the felt loss that people are experiencing? And then which parts of my challenge are more adaptive or technical?
Thanks, Dennis. Solo un recordatorio que cuando ingresen a su cuarto pueden presionar el botón de chat y las instrucciones le van a seguir a su cuarto.
Thank you.
Volvimos.
Excellent. I don't see, there's a few smiles. Very nice. There's a few smiles. I don't see any tears. So fantastic.
Not yet, Dennis.
So we oriented you to a couple of ideas. Get on the balcony, and then how do we understand what's not being said? And we've also talked a bit about this idea of what's the difference between something technical and something adaptive, where the adaptive things are going to be harder because we have to learn, we have to try, and people find that most difficult. So I'm wondering if a couple of teams would talk about what did you talk about in your teams? Danielle, I see you had your camera on. What did you guys talk about?
Si quieren, Dennis, ¿puedo yo? Oliver Rojas.
Oh, sure.
¿Cómo estás, Dennis? ¿Qué tal? Sí, ha sido muy interesante. En mi equipo habíamos conversado que realmente estamos pasando un proceso de cambio en la forma de gestionar, en la forma de administrar tanto los recursos materiales como recursos humanos, ¿no? Dada la coyuntura actual, lo que ha traído el COVID, ha originado muchas cosas, problemas políticos también. A raíz de las últimas elecciones en Perú y lo que están viviendo, está originando que el tipo de cambio, o sea, la conversión cada vez sea más cara, ¿no? Hace unos 2 años un dólar estaba en 3 soles y un poco más, hoy por hoy está arriba de los 4 soles, y eso está originando que la compra, materias primas y demás cosas, se encarezcan, ¿no? Cada vez sobre todo si importamos productos, está más complicado, cada vez el costeo se hace complicado. Entonces, técnicamente es fácil porque 2 más 2 es 4, 3 más 2 es 5 y listo, y se ajusta y ese es un nuevo costo, ¿no? Ahí no hay mucho que decir. De la misma forma, yo que trabajo en Bolivia sufro de ambas corrientes, ¿no? El costo de los materiales encarecen, pero también nosotros somos una empresa con buen porcentaje en facturación sobre óleos, aceite, manteca y margarina, lo cual también hemos visto que el precio del crudo en estos últimos 11 meses se ha disparado, se ha elevado muchísimo, con un crecimiento más del 100%, lo cual nos ha obligado a nosotros a tener la responsabilidad de generar capturas de precio, ¿no? De hacer incrementos no sustanciales, pero poco a poco. Entonces, la forma de argumentar la venta, de negociar la venta, de trabajar con los equipos ha cambiado. Y ese es un proceso adaptativo. Hemos tenido que ir pensando fuera de la caja cómo manejar, porque estamos acostumbrados a gestionar de una forma, pero hoy por hoy nos obliga a ver de otra forma, ¿no? De mirar, el estar atentos de cómo se siente la fuerza de ventas ante estos incrementos de precios. Cómo manejamos las conversaciones con la fuerza de ventas de cara a que puedan generar las ventas, porque ustedes saben, el vendedor cuando le des un precio, un descuento, una bonificación o una escala atractiva vende más, pero cuando se trata de decirle no, ahora cada semana vamos a revisar los precios y yo no te aseguro que el precio que actualmente tengamos se mantenga en el mes. Entonces eso sí origina un roce con el mismo cliente, pero si el vendedor no sabe manejar esas objeciones es muy complicado. Entonces nos toca estar más de cerca con los equipos, estar trabajando en conjunto con todas las áreas, todos los stakeholders, y sí nos está obligando, ¿no? Yo comentaba y hemos empezado a hacer algunas cosas interesantes aquí en Bolivia y ha sido todo un proceso adaptativo. Por darles un ejemplo, nosotros tenemos un área que es el canal industrial institucional, donde nosotros siempre, nuestros mejores clientes eran clientes aceiteros, aceite, manteca, ¿no? Y siempre vendíamos a grandes industrias galleteras, a empresas chocolateras, etc. Pero dada la situación, el tema del aceite que se ha vuelto bien complicado en tema de precios, hemos tenido que cambiarnos y orientarnos hacia otra categoría que es muy importante, que es Home and Personal Care. Entonces, hemos empezado a dar una mirada hacia clínicas, hospitales, hoteles, moteles que nos pueden demandar todos estos productos de la categoría de cuidado del hogar y limpieza. Entonces, hemos empezado a cambiar el chip a nuestros vendedores para que empiecen a prospectar ese tipo de clientes que habitualmente no estaban acostumbrados. Y ha sido buenazo porque ha sido todo un proceso de adaptación a esta nueva situación, ¿no? De igual forma, en esa situación en la cual hay que ser más eficientes en costos, estamos viendo cómo hacemos más productiva nuestra fuerza de ventas. Y hemos empezado a revisar el día a día, día típico de un vendedor, y nos ha tocado ver que realmente 1 hora y media del tiempo diario de un vendedor dedicaban a depósito en banco. Desde contar el dinero, desde traslado al banco y desde estar en el banco era 1 hora y media. Hicimos un ejercicio, cómo reducimos esa 1 hora y media, trabajando con lugares como agentes de recaudación de dinero, pero cerca de los mercados, para que de 1 hora y media reduzca a media hora. Y esa hora que ganamos lo hemos traducido a mayores visitas, mayores ventas y mayores cobranzas. O sea, ha sido un golazo y ha sido de la mano de un proyecto que lo hemos llamado Sistema Integral de Gestión de Ventas, de la excelencia, y hemos logrado. Entonces, pero sí ha sido un proceso adaptativo porque al principio hay un rechazo a ese cambio, ¿no? El vendedor precisamente no tiene temor a cambio, sino tiene temor a que lo cambien, ¿no? Entonces, hemos tratado de, no, ahora nos están controlando porque seguramente nos quieren sacar, ¿no? Ahora nos están controlando porque nos quieren prescindir de nosotros, quieren reducir gente. No, más bien al contrario, es cómo sacamos esa milla extra, cómo sacamos esa productividad adicional para compensar el alza en los costos, ¿no?
So in there's a lot. That's a lot. You guys did that in 15 minutes. So Oliver, some things feel like technical challenges, like there's a price increase. Well, we know how to handle a price increase. They're spending too much time not with clients. Well, we know how to manage those schedules. Those feel like more technical kinds of things. But how do I have this new kind of conversation with a new customer segment? How do I think about these things when I'm worried and I'm uncertain about what's happening in the environment? Those feel like more adaptive, right? Those are a little more disorienting for people. And so their emotions get a little higher, even though some pieces are technical, some pieces are a lot more unknown. And so they make it harder for them to move through. Very, very good example. Who else? What else? Someone else on another team.
Denis, en nuestro grupo estábamos comentando de los diferentes challenges, cada uno desde su área, desde lo que le estaba tocando vivir. Uno de ellos también era vinculado a como mencionaba Oliver, sobre el tema de recursos, cambiar ese mindset de hacer más con lo mismo o con menos. Pero otros proyectos también venían vinculados, o otros challenges venían vinculados a la adaptación de proyectos de tecnología, nos comentaba Jaime también el fortalecimiento de la cultura de seguridad en plantas industriales. Pero lo que tenían en común todos los challenges que nosotros teníamos al frente era, por un lado, que requerían mucha cercanía con los actores, con las personas, con los stakeholders, mucha escucha. Y de hecho coincidíamos en que era una escucha, no cualquier tipo de escucha, sino una escucha bastante activa, de esa profunda, de esa en la que escuchas hasta lo que no se dice, ¿no? Y también que en todos los casos esto era retador porque habían sentimientos de pérdida de por medio, ¿no? Y que tocaba estar en sintonía y comprender eso también, para comprender cómo liderar esos cambios.
Great example. And is there an example of where people, like what's an example of something that's not being said? Is it I'm losing control, or is it I'm losing responsibility? Maybe you didn't get into some of the details, but I'm wondering about what would be an example of something that they would never have said, but if we listen carefully, we can kind of figure it out.
Muchas veces es como dices, estoy perdiendo el control, estoy perdiendo responsabilidad. Otras veces es tan duro como no sé cómo hacerlo. Estoy perdido en qué debo hacer a continuación.
That's a big one, right? Which is, I know how to do one way. And whenever I'm not expert and when I don't know, that's risky. That's high risk. And there's no success formula. That's probably more. Now, we at Alicorp, we love our control. We love our control mechanisms, but I also think not knowing the answer is right up there with it. Thank you for that. Maybe one more. What else came up in your conversation, please? Uchi, were you trying to get in there, or was somebody else? I may have talked over somebody. What's one other group? What did you talk about?
If you want, I can
Thanks,
share. I can share what I shared. I'm part of the innovation team in Alicorp, and due to the current situation that we are, the political current situation that we're living in right now, there is a focus more into looking into projects or problems that have to be solved more in the short term. And within the innovation team, we're used to working projects that are more towards the long term, right? Where the solution is, we take more time in investigating and understanding consumers' needs. So we do not necessarily have kind of like a specific timeline. We can take more time into investigating and then kind of like proposing different solutions. But now, due to the current situation, there is a shift towards our mindset as the innovation team, where we have to start focusing more into short-term projects, and that definitely implica, I don't know how you say that in English, but what?
Implies.
Yeah, it implies that we have to change the way that we think and the way that we currently work. Not only us as leaders, but our team members below us. So I feel it's a very adaptive change.
Yeah. What feels risky about it? Is it like there's no stage gates? You can't do it in phases. It's all right. But
you can do it in phases, and there's stage gates. I think that the risk that we might go through, that maybe very important talent could actually say, you know, I'm no longer interested in working here, you know, I prefer working somewhere else. So it's something that can happen. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what's the felt sense of loss for people? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I think it's very interesting, because I think everybody's feeling a compressed time frame in the current, like, not only is it uncertain, it's like everything's faster and it's big scenario planning time and a bunch of uncertainty. But what do you think is the felt sense of loss in the team? Like, what is it we don't like about it?
I think it's probably that they feel that they're no longer doing disruptive or working on really disruptive and really like creative projects. And I think it has to do with a sense that not necessarily innovation should be focused in disruptive projects, right? It should be focused in doing things differently, you know, and in solving users' problems. So I think it's more a change of mindset. And maybe for some people, it's going to be easy to migrate to this way of work, where we have to focus more in the short term, obviously not leaving behind the long term. But for others, it's going to be, no, I don't want to, you know? So I feel that we're going to have a blend between the two, you know, of people that are willing to stay and people that are going to be, no, this is not for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that happens. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that happens all the time. Change, you know, there's people that would adapt and there's others that are like, I'm not going to adapt, you know?
Yeah. And you've just described this, this idea of having to be ambidextrous, right? With both hands. Sometimes you're going to have to be right here, fix this now. And then sometimes you can do the broader change the business kinds of things. Yeah. Very nice. Thank you. And thanks for, that was super clear. Let me get you into some of the interesting parts of the second chapter here. So we talked a little bit about, don't underestimate the desire of humans to maintain the status quo. Systems like to keep things the same. And whether it's an organism, an animal, a human, or an organization, we have an immune system. And it's not good or bad. It's not that we're trying to kill off something that we think is bad. It's just that the reaction of a system to change is to try and preserve the status quo. And so how do we offset that? How do we think about being able to work our way around that corporate immune system response? And so let's see, do I have my, oh, I don't. Let me give you my favorite little equation here. So if everybody can see that on the bottom right side. And so here, this is what you need to know about the corporate immune system. And that is preserving the past plus perfecting the present does not equal finding the future. And sometimes we get confused, right? The corporate immune system is trying to preserve the past. And then even when we think we're changing, what we're doing is perfecting the present. We're just trying to make today's business better, right? But neither of those things equals finding the future, particularly when we think about adaptive challenges. And so usually, the three ways that the corporate immune system operates is through precedent, or we've always done it that way. It's a tradition, it's part of our culture, or people. The people who really know how to win here, the people that do well here, do it this way, the way we've always done it. Or sometimes it's process. We tried this a lot, this is the way it works. But precedent, people, and process are the ways that the system protects the status quo. Those are the three things that usually come out to kill off new ideas whenever you try to change or reduce complexity or try something new. And even when we think about continuous improvement, and this is, I think, very much to your example, if we're always focused on today and the near-term things, we're probably doing continuous improvement. We're probably trying to perfect the present. We're tuning up where we are. We're not necessarily finding the future, what the real final piece could be. So those tend to be the vehicles, the ways that the system comes out and heads off to change, slows us down or confounds us in some ways. And then here is the secret to navigating the corporate immune system. Does anybody know how many experiments Google does every year? Anybody know?
No.
Anybody want to guess?
100?
100?
I would say.
100.
5,000.
20,000. Very good. Somebody was fast. About 20,000 a year, right? Their culture is based. Now they can cheat, right? Because they can segment off a small group of users and they can try out some new platform things because of software. But the point is their culture is built on experimentation. And so experiments allow us to do several things. Most people can get on board with an experiment. Let's try it and see what happens. And then we can decide. It lets you move to what's the first next step? How do we move forward and get there? The beauty of experiments are you can usually run a couple at once. You don't have to run just one. You can look for contrary data and make corrections. That is, oh, we didn't get what we expected. Well, it's an experiment. So what does that tell us and how do we want to pivot and move it from here? But just framing your change from the frame of experimentation will get you far down the path of navigating the corporate immune system. So you'll often hear me say on difficult change, what's the first next step? What could we try? And what would our hypothesis be? How would that work out? And then maybe it's proven, maybe it's not. But then what did we learn from it? Those are questions that frame experiments rather than here's the new way. And here's the way the policy will shift, right? So experimentation is the #1 best way to navigate the corporate immune system. So here's where we are in our story. We start with this idea of observation. We have to get on the balcony and we collect some data. What are the patterns? What are people doing? If I'm down on the dance floor trying to do the change, I'll miss something. So what is it that people aren't telling me? And what's slowing us down? Or what is it that's keeping people from moving forward? Being able to get the distance helps you. Then we try to stay open to a variety of interpretations. So we listen for that idea, right? The authors, Linsky and Heifetz from Harvard, talk about the song beneath the waves. What is it that's really happening here? And how will we ever hope to intervene there? So and once I know what the felt sense of loss is, then I can move into the series of experiments that let me talk about smart risks. How do I think about smart risks? What's the first next thing that we can try? How might we advance our thinking here? It's that simple when we think about these really difficult changes. So here's the thing though, when the change is most difficult, leaders usually move through the change curve faster than their people. So we usually have gone down into the depths of despair and we've been through the disorienting moments about the change and we're usually coming out and we're making sense pretty quickly. Our people usually lag us. And our temptation is to think, well, okay, I'm there, I got it. So why aren't we all there? And what we don't want to do is turn up the heat, just turn it up on high and walk away. Say everybody has to change now. What we do need to do is think about this change as a thermostat, right? And our job is to regulate the pressure. We need to turn up the heat until people start checking out or till people start not staying focused on the hard change, and then we dial back the heat. So first at this stage in chapter 2 is how can we name the conflict and then regulate the distress? If I can name what's happening, that is people have lost some sense of control. They used to have control over this, now they don't. Or people don't know how to do this. This is so new to them, it feels risky and they feel exposed. Can I name that conflict and then regulate that heat? How do I keep you moving forward even though you're uncomfortable? How do I keep you trying new things even though it's not part of your skill set? One of the ways we do that is to sequence the pace of the work, right? And this is another thing that AliCorp is quite good at, is we like a lot of projects. We like to take on a lot of different things. And so the work for us as leaders in sequence and pacing the work is prioritization. What we don't want to do is overwhelm and disorient the people who are responsible for the work. So how do we keep people focused on the few most important things, right? How do we keep an eye to the heat so where they're not checking out or disengaging because they just can't do it, but we're also giving them some technical work to do. Here's some things you know how to do, and now we got to get back to the hard work. But we regulate that very carefully. Now we, as leaders, have to have the emotional capacity to tolerate people's uncertainty and frustration, because when it's hard change, people get frustrated. When it's hard change, people get exasperated and they don't know the way. Our job is to hold fast, right? With empathy, right? So I know it's difficult, but we still have to move. I know this is hard. I'm here for you. I'm going to back you up, but we still have to move. But our job is to have the emotional capacity to tolerate the uncertainty and the tension that they feel and not fix it for them, right? If we keep fixing it for them or we keep giving them the answer, they're very happy to look up to us and keep coming to us for the answer, but it's their work. And so the hard work of leadership is for us to hold firm and say, so what would you do next? What's the first next step? Bring me 2 ideas. Let's talk about what should happen. But if you fix it for them, they'll keep coming back to you because it's hard. All right. So here's our second breakout. And then I would like to go here, Flor, for 20 minutes. Now, when you think about your change, pick this difficult change, or in one case, we've heard about some significant changes in the sales force and how we're going about helping people with both pricing changes as well as new kinds of customer segmentation that, and plus it is a disorienting political environment. We've also talked about the shifting nature, even our innovation team, who are very near-term focused and may not be doing all the work they hope they would do, at least for the current time. But think about your challenge. Where is the corporate immune system going to come out and try and keep you from making the change? Is it policy? Is it the people who've always done it a certain way? Is it that we have a history here of not doing this kind of work? Where is the corporate immune system going to come out? And where will people be frustrated? We've talked about 2 big places. I'm not in control and I don't know how. Those are 2 ways, but where will frustration surface? And in fact, for now, Flor, I think those 2 questions are great. So for the next 20 minutes, where is the corporate immune system likely to come out and counter the changes I want to make? And second, where will the frustration and uncertainty surface? Can I actually name it? And let's move in and have a quick conversation about our challenges. Chapter 2.
Thank you.
So what did you talk about? The corporate immune system and how it's going to surface? What happens whenever we, what kind of frustration do we know we're going to see? But who'd like to start?
Bueno, de alguna forma, Denis, si arranco con algo que comentamos en el equipo, en un ejemplo que estábamos nombrando sobre un cambio en el que vamos a estar haciendo una automatización y que desde el lado técnico no hay mucha discusión, porque a la larga es un robot, para el que lo diseña debe decir que no hay discusión, te quiero ver a vos diseñándolo y desarrollándolo, pero desde el lado de la parte más difícil de la adaptación, bueno, hay gente que va a estar absolutamente a favor porque mejora la calidad del producto, porque mejora la ergonomía, mejoran los costos y da crecimiento, pero también hay gente que puede sentirse, que se van a sentir frustradas porque a la larga es el peor de los cambios. Quizás estoy viendo que el día N+1 me quedo sin trabajo, ¿no? Entonces, esos savings de headcount reduction habitualmente tienen esa parte de frustración bastante difícil de manejar. Y bueno, de alguna forma, cuando hablábamos del sistema inmune, a nosotros nos pareció que todo lo que tiene que ver con la cultura y la historia de la empresa, que cada vez que ha tenido ejemplos de automaciones y hemos tenido casos similares a esto, hemos trabajado en la capacitación y en el crecimiento profesional de las personas, para que luego puedan pasar a otro lugar y tratar de manejar siempre a la persona por sobre todas las cosas, más allá de los costos. Es un valor, algo que te ayuda un montón a la hora de gestionar este cambio. De alguna manera, lo que hablábamos, casi sin querer lo hicimos durante todo este tiempo, fuimos preparando el escenario para que no pase que haya esos temores. Pero quizá no lo hicimos preparado pensando en eso, sino que lo hacíamos porque está como en nuestra sangre, ¿no? Como que sabemos que tenemos que cuidar a las personas. Entonces, eso es como un sistema inmune, porque a la larga reacciona sin pensar, ¿no? Y eso está bueno. Pero sería mucho mejor si lo programamos y lo pensamos paso a paso. Bueno, ese fue un caso. Se extendió un poco, hablamos un poco más largo, pero en resumen es eso.
And the specter of automation. So there's, I think the interesting interplay that you bring up, Oscar, is AliCorp is about we take care of our people. You know, we take care of the country. We make sure that people are treated well. And yet when we think about things like automation, the robotics or efficiencies, then people get impacted in negative ways. It puts the values right in your face around what does it mean to care. So I think it's a great example and a really tough one. And so it's not, I mean, everything's happening. You could imagine people would be very personally disrupted because of just the threat of that, whether it's reality or not. Thank you for the example. What else? Who else can tell us about the conversation they had? Bruno.
Sí. Hola. Algo que estábamos hablando en el grupo es de que sobre el sistema inmune corporativo, ¿ya? Que hay una parte que depende de uno como líder qué puede hacer con su equipo, ¿ya? Pero hay otra parte que depende de lo que sucede afuera de tu equipo. Entonces, yo hablaba un caso mío que es sobre un tema de que mi área es un área de servicio, donde hay un modelo de atención, etc. Y el sistema inmune corporativo influye mucho en la expectativa que tiene tu cliente interno, porque tú puedes impulsar en tu equipo que se adapte a una nueva forma de trabajar, que se adapte a una nueva forma de pensar, inclusive a veces, pero te chocas con que la estructura de la compañía tiene una expectativa sobre tú cómo debes performar, cómo debes atenderlos. Entonces, eso, y en una compañía grande como AliCorp, es un tema no menor, ¿no?
And Bruno, when you, back at I think one of the first points you made is there are some things that we can control and there's plenty of things we cannot. And our ability to, I don't know what we say in Spanish, but our ability to roll with the punches, right? And so I think you bring up an interesting distinction that is, we may have talked about this back at session 1, that is resilience. Personal resilience is a positive response to adversity, right? That's the definition of resilience. That is, when I get knocked down, I get back up and I have a positive response. Or when I'm surprised, I have that's kind of the definition of resilience, right? But an adaptive capacity means I'm learning the right lessons from my experience and I'm applying them to new and novel situations. And I think sometimes those things are so close to each other that sometimes we get knocked down and it's hard for us to be adaptive. It's hard for us to keep trying and learning and doing the experimentation. And then sometimes when you hear the pressure from the outside or things we don't have under our control, you have the potential for an amygdala hijack. Right? That is, you can have a disproportionate emotional response because something strikes you suddenly, and then it shuts down our reasoning and our thinking, and it makes it harder for us to adapt. And so I'm making a long story to say, well, we can work on our resilience, which is our positive response to adversity, and we can also self-regulate. That is, some things are going to hit us, and if our instinct is emotional, then we can't think as well. We can't problem solve as well. So we need a little distance. We need to take a walk. We need to give ourselves a little bit of space, whatever those mechanisms are. But this idea that we need to take care of ourselves as leaders first, and then you'll be best for your teams, because there will be times where we can't change the political climate and some of the decisions that the government makes. What we can control is our response and our own self-regulation. I think it's really important. I know that wasn't exactly your point, Bruno, but it reminded me about what we can and can't control. It's a great point. One more, someone else. What did you guys talk about? Please. Hey, Kenji.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Denis,
Buenas tardes.
nosotros en el grupo estábamos compartiendo sobre el tema de dónde está el sistema inmune que vimos. Compartimos un caso, por ejemplo, en un área de supply, donde precisamente una de las fortalezas que siempre decíamos o mencionamos dentro del área de supply son los procesos robustos que se tienen dentro del área y que es mucho la clave del éxito que se puede tener en el área para lograr eficiencias. Y es ahí donde este tema de mantener los procesos y asegurar esa estandarización en estos, especialmente en estos meses tan cambiantes que la pandemia nos ha golpeado con los equipos de la planta, que no son necesariamente los titulares, esta variabilidad que tenemos en materias primas que también nos complica y nos hace de una manera hacer que estos procesos empiecen a reaccionar y decir, esta es la forma en la que siempre hemos manejado la planta, esta es la forma en que nos manejamos y esta es la forma que da resultados. Es ahí donde empieza a salir el proceso inmune. Para esto también entramos en una discusión en el grupo donde parte de la ventaja es que tenemos gente muy experimentada que aplica esos procesos, pero a la par es la gente que a la vez con la que podrías lograr los cambios, es la gente en la que confías y te soportas para lograr estas flexibilidades al tiempo cambiante que estamos viviendo y que suele ser la gente la primera que empieza a generar la frustración de decir, ante una pequeña desviación, un pequeño error sobre el estándar, te dicen, ven, esto no es así, esto no funciona así, la forma de trabajo que hemos tenido siempre es esta y es lo que deberíamos mantener. Es ahí donde entra, conversamos en el equipo, este proceso de acercarse a la gente, explicarles los motivos y explicarle que es parte de estos pequeños errores o desviaciones que se pueda tener, a la par de soportarlos con conocimiento, con áreas como desarrollo que nos ayuda mucho en la parte tecnológica y empezar a ir resolviendo estos problemas para mitigar esta frustración, precisamente la gente más especializada que tenemos en las áreas, ¿no?
Exacto, Dani.
Always. And then Kenji, I'm going to come back to you. So how many, you don't have to raise your hand. I was going to say, how many people are engineers? Because I was going to make an engineer joke, but I'm not going to. So now, as engineers, we're anybody in the hard sciences is trained in some form of universalism, and that is there is a best way. There are best practices, and it does apply across many contexts and situations. So it is hard for us when we're hard trained in those sciences to let go and try new, because we want it to be proven, we want it to work, right? And risk is something that you try to squeeze out. And I love where you were going, Danielle, and that is how spicy can we make the stew, right? We can't make it so spicy nobody will eat it, but we can make it a little bit of spice, right? We can do some experiments, we can try something. So it isn't that's always the way it's been done. It is, because that's true, but what are some of the new ways that we can try, right? What are those experimentations? And you're right, particularly in supply, you're careful, but you can still take risks, small risks. It can be a little bit spicy when we get in there. Thank you. And Kenji, I think I cut you off. You were trying to get in there before.
No, sí, no, gracias, Denis. No, estábamos en el mismo grupo con Dani, ¿no? Entonces, en adición a lo que él comenta también,
gotcha.
Sí, también conversamos sobre que para el líder también, ¿no? O sea, cuáles son los momentos también que el líder tiene, ¿no? Porque hay momentos, por ejemplo, y en mi caso, ¿no? Yo, por ejemplo, les comentaba al equipo, ¿no? Soy súper positivo, tengo bastante energía, o por lo menos intento mantenerla y estar contagiando de eso al equipo y todo, pero también hay momentos donde uno siente que, no sé, pues, ¿no? Tal vez las cosas no van como uno quiere y la ansiedad te comienza a ganar, ¿no? Y cómo manejar eso también, ¿no? O sea, y ahí también surgen algunas cosas, ¿no? Y comentábamos cuán importante también es tener a alguien o crear una confianza con parte del equipo, ¿no? Para poder dividir ciertas cosas y también agarrar información que tal vez, o puntos ciegos que tal vez uno no lo está viendo en ese momento. Entonces, súper importante también mantener eso en el proceso, ¿no? Porque hay cosas que también desde donde estamos tal vez no lo vemos, ¿no? Y son varias personas con las cuales estamos conectados, ¿no? y son varias expectativas también que se tienen que manejar, entonces es importante ir también con la ayuda de estas personas de confianza, ¿no? También ir trabajando todos los temas. Entonces,
no, but your point is still really important. That is, if we don't smile and if we don't bring the energy, nobody else will, right? When people are disrupted and those changes are really adaptive, then we're the ones that have to be the energizers. We're the ones that have to say, I don't know the answer, but you know, we're going to work on it. We're going to figure it out. And I think that's huge. And I think people look for that, whether they say it or not. I think that's huge. I was gonna, a couple of years ago, I was working with Harley Davidson, and I was talking with the CEO, and they were talking, all the engineers were talking about project management principles. And then the CEO came in and he had a t-shirt that said, project management is like riding a bicycle, except the bicycle's on fire, you're on fire, and you're riding through hell and everything is on fire, which was just about the funniest t-shirt I've seen in terms of project management in the mix. Anybody else? What else did you talk about in terms of the frustrations that come out, the tensions that we experience in some of these more difficult changes? Let's hear from one more.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes.
Hey, Fabiana. Thank you.
¿Cómo estás? Seguramente Oliver me puede completar mejor porque él vive esta situación, pero el caso que estábamos comentando en el grupo es esto de la afectación de los precios debido al aumento en las materias primas, en Bolivia particularmente, y después poderlo extrapolar a Perú, ¿no? Bueno, acá lo que veíamos era que lo importante para nosotros, en este caso, es las personas, ¿no? Es poder inmunizar también al equipo, a la gente, y en particular a la gente que está saliendo a la venta, ¿no? Porque tenés a los vendedores que se enfrentan a los clientes, donde le vas a ofrecer un producto más caro, con un incremento alto, y donde vos podés plantear un montón de estrategias y demás, pero tenés que preparar también a las personas que se van a enfrentar al cliente a saber qué responder. Ellos, sin lugar a duda, van a estar incómodos, no se van a sentir seguros al momento de comunicar, porque obviamente me imagino yo que el cliente le dirá, yo no soy vendedora, pero el cliente le dirá, che, esto está más caro, no te puedo comprar, porque las subas y demás. Tienen que tener respuestas y estar seguros de lo que están haciendo y darles nosotros, como sus líderes, una estrategia de cómo vender, ¿no? Y ahí el equipo nos comentaba de que la estrategia era comentarles que nosotros somos líderes de la marca y que si nosotros subimos los precios de una manera similar, las marcas que son más baratas nos van a seguir, y es también darle esa fortaleza al equipo para que pueda salir y enfrentar esta situación, porque finalmente ellos son los que ponen la cara al cliente, son nuestra cara, ¿no? Entonces de esa manera estamos inmunizando el equipo y obviamente también tenemos que trabajar con un plan. ¿Por qué? Porque esto es un tema, entendemos, de largo aliento. Entonces tenemos que planificar cómo vamos a ir acompañando a las personas durante todo el proceso y no siempre, y buscando las diferentes palancas, ¿no? Y no siempre con el mismo speech, porque ellos mismos van a tener motivaciones diferentes para poder bajonearse o no, dadas las circunstancias que estamos enfrentando. No sé, ahí, Oliver, si me querés complementar, bienvenido.
No, excelente, Fabi, lo has resumido muy bien. Lo has resumido muy bien, Fabi.
Please, Oliver, go ahead.
No, simplemente complementando eso, creo que en el equipo hemos comentado que es muy importante un plan de comunicación, contar un plan de comunicación una vez que hemos detectado las diferentes frustraciones del equipo, las diferentes incomodidades o inseguridad que tiene. Entonces sí es muy importante ese acompañamiento y estar al lado de ellos en todo momento, y como líderes pues ayudarlos, ¿no? A ir avanzando secuencialmente, paso por paso cada uno, ¿no? Y el ejemplo que dio Fabi es exactamente eso, ¿no? Exactamente ante esta situación que estamos viviendo, nos está tocando capturar precio, ir generando algunos pequeños incrementos, y esos incrementos siempre incomoda a la fuerza de ventas y también al cliente. Entonces hay que darle toda la confianza a los vendedores para que ellos tengan las armas y los argumentos precisos para ir sopesando esa situación.
I love that. I love the idea that we prepare people from being surprised. I think that's whenever salespeople get surprised, that's when you may have but when we can prepare well. And sometimes I think, I'm sure you do this too, which is we talk about what's the worst thing we can expect. What are the things that we're like, what are we hearing from the field? And so people are working hard to not be surprised. We're trying our very best to give them the tools and not be shocked in the moment that they can hit those things. And Fabiana, you brought up something really important, which is sales forces are the heart of resilience, right? That is, I mean, the salespeople are the exemplars of resilience. That is adversity and move beyond, adversity and move beyond. It is the nature of that business. Some fantastic examples. IMF, the International Monetary Fund, say they prepare well. So they have policies and preparation. They prepare well so that when there are emergencies that they can move fast, right? And same thing's true of sales forces. That is, we prepare well so that we can respond well and move fast. These are fabulous examples and great people who are examples of change leaders, right? Who are good at hitting adaptive change and adjusting in the moment. And I did want to mention this idea of immunizing people. So I spend time with Nike, a lot of time with Nike, and they are not at all self-conscious or embarrassed about self-talk, because all athletes have a talk track about self-talk. They talk about how they're going to win the game. They talk about how they're going to compete. And so I think that is absolutely important, that we immunize people as best we can to go out and hit challenges, because we are good. And telling people they're good, everybody has their own fears, everybody has their own uncertainties. But when you go out in a team, and the job of a leader is sometimes to lead from the front. So I love that idea as well. Anybody else? Anybody else before we move along? It's just starting to get fun. This is the fun part, in case anybody wasn't sure. This is the fun part right here. Jaime. No? Going once, going twice? All right, I'm gonna, yep, please. No?
Hola. Hola.
Angelica?
Yes. Sí, en mi grupo una de las cosas que compartíamos sobre, digamos, cuáles son estas estrategias personales para contener la tensión, y compartíamos como dos experiencias, ¿no? Bastante cercanas al final, es poder entender, digamos, la razonabilidad que hay detrás de la frustración de las personas, y era el caso de Adri que nos compartía, y es muy cercano al equipo que ella lidera o a los equipos que están muy cercanos a ella. Pero la pregunta que nos hacíamos es, ¿y cómo logramos eso en clientes o proveedores o personas que no son tan cercanas a nosotros, ¿no? Y bueno, decíamos, quizás es a través de estos facilitadores que siempre se buscan en estos procesos de cambio, a ir buscando esta causa raíz de estas frustraciones o de estas incomodidades o esta resistencia a los cambios, ¿no? Básicamente compartíamos eso, y otra experiencia es en caso que tengamos, digamos, un liderazgo cercano o a nuestros equipos u otros equipos, es buscar esta transparencia, en poner las cosas como son, para poder dar un espacio abierto a que ellos puedan transmitir cuáles son esas frustraciones, tratar de ser un soporte y buscar, por otro lado, respuestas donde haya, o si no hay, también dar claridad de que hay ciertas incertidumbres, porque no siempre las respuestas están, ¿no?
Yeah.
Gracias.
So Angelica, what's the secret? Did you guys uncover the big secret to?
Mi secreto, sí, en caso personal, mi secreto está en cascadas con los equipos. Y eso propiciando abiertamente, dándole visibilidad de lo que uno puede manejar, y dándole también, siendo realistas cuando no hay cierta claridad, pero por dónde podemos seguir enfocándonos para ir lograr el éxito o ir alineados a lo que queremos, ¿no? básicamente es observación, conversación, cercanía con los equipos, que es el mayor tiempo que debemos estar invirtiendo como líderes, ¿no?
So you illuminate, you examine the entire value chain, and you try to take it piece by piece, and you can see where people are getting stuck, and as they work through it. And then that, I think one of the big jobs of leaders is to remove obstacles. I think we often think we have many jobs, but getting stuff out of the way for people to do good work, magic. And these last two comments reminded me of something that an old friend had said to me years and years ago. Says you can't sell anything if you're desperate, right? And so if you don't have some self-control, if we don't have some self-regulation, if we haven't prepared well, right? All those things are absolutely critical. Love it, love it. Let me thank you all for jumping right in and giving such a good, interesting range of examples in your conversations. Let me get you into this third chapter. Move this over a little bit. So what we've talked about so far in chapter 1 is get on the balcony, think about the adaptive nature of our changes, separate that from the technical changes that we face. Second was, where will the corporate immune system come out and try to kill off the changes we're trying to lead through? And then can we name the conflict or tension that people face? Can we name it clearly? Because then we can address it and we can regulate that distress like a thermostat. Like we will help manage where we don't just flip it on high and walk away. And so finally, third, chapter 3 is how do we make sure we give the work back and we battle work avoidance? And I want to talk about what is work avoidance and how it shows up. But this I've mentioned before. Oftentimes people look up the chain of command. They expect us to do the work that they actually are responsible for. And so particularly in times of tension and difficulty, people can be a little more passive. They look for you to tell them when they actually are responsible for finding answers close to the issues, close to where the work is happening. And so we can fall into that bad habit of fixing it for them, of telling them what to do. And our real work is, how do we support rather than control? And how do we set expectations that our direct report need to take the responsibility? And so you'll hear leaders that do this well will say, well, what's the first next step? How do we start? What are a couple of ways that you could try something? What would, come back and tell me how it goes, rather than do X. So the first job for us is give the work back. It's hard because it's probably work we know how to do and we want to help people and we don't want them to be in pain and we don't want them to be disoriented or struggle, but they must. Right? They must struggle with some of this ambiguity just like we do. And it makes them better for the kinds of changes that they have to lead later. So that's one, give the work back. Now here's work avoidance. This is an interesting idea. And that is the resistance that emerges to protect the status quo. So whenever resistance emerges, these are the big 5. These are the popular 5 forms of work avoidance. Whenever we try to start working on an adaptive challenge, sometimes the work avoidance happens in denial. That is, there's not a problem. You guys just want to change things. It's not really a problem. This is working. The second kind of work avoidance is escapism. Well, if there is a problem, it's not my problem. It's at the other end of the boat. That's a supply chain problem, or that's a sales problem. It's certainly not, right? It's certainly not an innovation problem. So escapism is the second kind. And then scapegoating is the third. That is, if they would just tell me what to do, then I would do it. Just tell me and I'll do it. But they won't tell me. If the government, it isn't clear what they're going to do, our leaders, Alfredo, if he would just tell me, I would do it. But that's another form of work avoidance, right? That is, I'm still responsible for some responsibility. I'm responsible to execute and do some work. The fourth kind is cynicism. Well, it's impossible. it's a new government, nothing is possible, we don't know what they're going to do, so we wait, right? Cynicism is another form of work avoidance. And then finally, is the last kind is fake remedies. And this is the hardest one to see, because here it's where people always define the problems to fit the skills that they have today. Oh, if we just had better project management, I'm sure we could figure this out. Oh, if we just really got some more controls, if we reviewed this project more often, we probably, but people try to use the skills they have today and apply them to new situations that might require new skills. One of the ways fake remedies also comes up is we like committees, right? That is, let's get a bunch of people together and talk about it. And then we'll get them together again and we'll talk about it, because then it spreads the risk very wide and then nobody's responsible. So I'm kind of interested in where does work avoidance show up for us, right? And so I just want to do an open discussion, just like, what do people think? Are we good at support? Like, can we support and challenge versus give people the answers? Do we shield people from the challenges that they should undertake themselves? And then if work avoidance pops up, what does it look like? What do we hear? What do you think? Pick any one of these questions you'd like to chat about.
Denis, justo en el grupo, cuando estábamos hablando con el equipo en el room anterior, sí discutimos algo sobre el tema de no dar las respuestas a nuestra gente, sino es hacer que ellos le encuentren en ellas mismas. Y hablaba Jaime, y hablaba Frank, y hablaba Marco, y conversábamos sobre el hecho de que es como un proceso de madurez, ¿no? Probablemente al inicio, cuando recién arrancamos como líderes, como estamos en una zona de cosas que sabemos hacer, nos puede ganar el decirles la respuesta o el guiarlos ya directamente hacia la ejecución, pero que no nos damos cuenta de lo que eso implica a nuestra gente. No lo estamos ayudando a que se desarrollen de la manera acelerada en la que deberían, pero tampoco nos estamos ayudando a transmitir muchas veces ese mensaje que inconscientemente transmitimos, y es: no pasa nada si hay error, no pasa nada si es que nos equivocamos. Y comentábamos un poco que tal vez nuestra cultura como compañía, que era una cultura ganadora, y de hecho hablamos siempre del lideramos con pasión, del somos los número uno, del lideramos los mercados, lo cual está súper bueno, y que pero esa cultura al mismo tiempo a veces ha hecho un poco complicado que naveguemos hacia lo nuevo, hacia lo diferente, hacia lo que, para probar algo nuevo y diferente, va a haber un error, ¿no? Y por ahí Frank sacaba como el caso familiar de todos los que somos padres, de cuando le enseñamos a manejar bicicleta a nuestros hijos, tenemos que permitir que se caigan, porque si no dejamos que se caigan de la bicicleta, o sea, es imposible que aprendan. Pero qué difícil es, y se te hace tripas corazón, saber de que se va a caer el niño, y igual lo montas en la bicicleta y casi que cierras los ojos, pero bueno, es parte de ese proceso, ¿no? Y creo que ese ejemplo tan simple, pero llevado a nuestra vida laboral, ¿cuántas veces nos pasa? Que queremos coger la bicicleta todo el camino para que no se caigan proyectos, resultados, equipos, personas, y no se puede. Es insostenible, incluso para uno como líder, ¿no? Para tu propia salud mental.
I love that metaphor. I think that is a fabulous metaphor, because you can imagine holding your team, trying to keep them on the bike. No, as you go forward. So that you bring up a couple of things so there are some orthodoxies. There are just some things that are true in the culture that we don't think about because we're in it. And one is, don't make a mistake. We're winners here, and winners don't make mistakes. So there's probably something like that sits behind, right? And the other one is, don't waste time. Because if you know the answer, tell me the answer. Don't waste time. But what we then do is exactly what you say, is we disenable the people from helping us solve bigger problems later, because then everything keeps coming to us as leaders. Love it. Love it. What else? Anybody else think about where does work avoidance show up? What does that look like when we see it?
Denis.
Please. Oh, Oliver.
¿Qué tal? Sí, a mí me gustó mucho lo que
So
vimos.
wait, Oliver, is that car behind you? Is that where you do your sales calls from? Is that your corporate car? Or...
Sí, es el auto de la semana, no es del fin de semana, es de lunes a viernes. Ok, Denis, buena broma. No, les decía, me gustó mucho y es más, le saqué foto también a lo que vimos en la anterior clase. A mí me gusta tres alertas cuando el equipo está un poco temeroso. Es que no está listo, no está dispuesto y no es capaz. Y eso me gustó muchísimo, ¿no? Es más, ya lo transmití a mi equipo. Cuando vemos esos tres síntomas, cuando no está listo, capaz o predispuesto, y es una alerta. Entonces, algo que yo aconsejo y lo he puesto en práctica, ayuda muchísimo, es cuando empiezas a ver esto, para darles la capacidad y estén listos, empiezas a empoderarlos y hacer coaching con ellos. Y empiezas a darles cierta responsabilidad. Y sobre todo a los que están un poco más reacios al cambio. Cuando empiezas a empoderarlos, los comprometes, son los primeros, después embajadores del cambio, ¿no? Son los primeros que lideran y empiezan a defender. A mí me ha pasado muchísimo. Hace tiempo hicimos un cambio del sistema de incentivos, del sistema de comisiones a los vendedores, y tú sabes que todo un cambio del sistema de comisiones o incentivos es un cambio no menor. Y me acuerdo que tuve, del grupo que lideraba en ese momento, habían unos tres personas, tres vendedores complicados que estaban un poco reacios a ese cambio, ¿no? Porque tenían temor a perder, no a ganar. Y cuando agarré este grupo y los emprendedores y empezamos a trabajar con ellos, les soy responsable, que me aporten algunos inputs o ideas para mejorar, fue un éxito porque después sacamos lo que queríamos, me trajeron buenos inputs y luego empezamos a implementar después a toda la fuerza de ventas. Y fue buenísimo porque me ayudó bastante para poder encarrilar en buen términos todo el cambio, ¿no? Para que sea exitoso. Entonces creo que es muy importante ese nivel de responsabilidad y de empoderamiento.
What were they afraid? What were they worried about? Were they worried that they didn't know, or because they had mastered the old way? They knew the way to make money the old way. But what was it? What was it that was keeping them from moving?
La preocupación principalmente iba por un cambio de rutas, y en el cambio de rutas, cuando tú mueves a un vendedor y le cambias el sistema de incentivos, ellos están temerosos de que si su salario va a disminuir o va a mantenerse o va a mejorar. Y si el cambio de rutas, como están acostumbrados y están en una zona de confort, a veces un cambio de ruta les exige mayores retos, mayores desafíos. Y ante el desafío y el cambio de comisión, el temor era que tengan un menos salario, ¿no? Que o sea más exigente o empecemos a castigar más que premiar. Esa era la principal inquietud.
Yeah. I interrupted you, sorry. I didn't want to make sure you finish your point.
De acuerdo. Eso es él.
One more. Who else? What is on your mind about work avoidance or our ability to make sure that we are challenging and supporting and not overly directing? Anything else come to mind?
Yo por ahí comentar un poco de experiencia, y es cuando el equipo no está presto en este entorno de virtualidad a las reuniones, ¿no? Siempre está ocupado, no quiere escuchar, porque bueno, se ponen reuniones más de seguimiento o de alineamiento, ¿no? O para mostrar algunos resultados preliminares y siempre pasa algo, justo tuve un tema en casa, bueno, cosas por el estilo que por ahí te hacen sospechar de que no está preparado o no lo está haciendo o algo así, ¿no? Entonces, eso para mí en mi caso han sido algunos indicios con parte del equipo. No sé si se entendió.
Try, I'm still catching up on the translation. So try one more time.
Lo que decía era que por ahí un indicador es cuando las personas, que me pasa a mí, que están a tu cargo y tenés algunas reuniones de seguimientos, de validaciones, evitan esas reuniones por alguna razón, reprograman o ponen alguna excusa, ¿no? Tengo un problema en el hogar, ahora que estamos en la virtualidad principalmente, ¿no?
And what is it that they're avoiding?
Bueno, evitar de alguna forma la situación, ¿no? La responsabilidad, porque vos le estás delegando por ahí cosas que el equipo no está preparado para hacer, ¿no? Porque, por ahí por un compromiso, porque de hecho y creo que es una característica de Alicor, perdón, siempre están prestos al compromiso, están prestos digamos, a los desafíos inclusive, pero a veces no te dicen que no, o no te dicen que no pueden, o no necesariamente dicen que no, o que no entienden, ¿no? Entonces, eso puede llevar a que luego cuando empiezan a meterse en el tema y a tratar de desarrollarlo, no necesariamente lo evolucionen.
And get in over their head. It is a fantastic example of work avoidance that is, and I think this goes through all leadership levels at Alicorp. We don't like to say no. We don't like to prioritize and take things off. We like to do more things. We like to do big things. And then when it's too much, some of these things can happen where when the accountability time comes or the check-in comes, then you start seeing the reorganizing of time and calendars. But I think you just described a perfect example of what work avoidance looks like when people overcommit and we can't say no or we can't prioritize well. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let me give you the story at a glance. So this is don't panic. It's an easy picture once we talk through it. So there's a couple of interesting ideas here. And one is for adaptive change, there is this idea of productive disequilibrium. That is, people who are in disequilibrium, they are personally disrupted. They don't quite have their feet under them, but we still need them to be productive. That is, they don't know quite how to go forward, but they need to move forward. And so they are working through their disequilibrium. They're working through their uncertainty, but they need to keep moving. So the picture, let me see if I can get my annotate feature going here. This is the path of a technical challenge. You put in a new piece of software, you have a new supply routes, you have changed the compensation system and sales, but if it is a technical challenge that is known and within our expertise, it can be disorienting at first. It can be very disorienting, but then quickly we understand the implications of it, and there might be one bump. You'll see, let me get my mouse back. There might be one bump here. Apparently, I need some adaptive capacity in my own. There we go. There might be one bump here where you find something new you didn't understand, but very quickly you get a grip on it over time. But here's the issue. For adaptive changes, things that require learning and they're very difficult, they're not very disorienting at first, right? So they get more disorienting as we start to learn more. Then we think we got it. And then they get more disorienting. And then we figure out some more things, we try some things, and we think we got it, and then we realize we didn't know enough and we don't got it. And so you start seeing 2 or 3 of these bumps of people being disoriented. Oh no, I thought we knew, now I'm not sure. Oh no, I thought that was over, but no, it's not. Now what happens is after the 3rd bump, that's when work avoidance starts to pop out. That's when people will start saying, it's not possible, nothing can happen, we can't do anything. And that's when we have to watch, is when people have hit a couple of difficult times, they'll start exhibiting some of that work avoidance. If they would just tell me, I'm not sure that anything can be done, that's when our job as leaders comes in. And the point that I want to make here is that the nature of adaptive change is a story of a little bit of disorienting work that you learn over time. They don't get solved fast. They get solved more and more as you learn more and more. So adaptive challenges require us to hold steady the most. And you'll see that little dark gray zone in the middle. That's the zone, right? That is, people can be uncomfortable, but we don't want them to check out. And we want to keep them in that zone where we're going to keep learning and keep moving, keep learning and keep moving. All right, so that is the story of adaptive challenges versus technical challenges. We've talked about some of the techniques that we can use as we go through and start deciding how we want to think about bringing our teams along with us for some of the adaptive issues that they face. I'm going to pause for any questions or comments here, and then I'm going to move us into something, we're going to move into some of these little working groups, a little bit on our playbook that we'll talk more about tomorrow. But are there any thoughts, observations that this whole story for these last couple of hours raises for you, or any questions?
Denis, me quedé en mente con algo de lo que mencionaste al final, que está vinculado a una problemática que también comentábamos en mi equipo. Lo mencionaste cuando hablamos de work avoidance, y es también cómo no priorizamos, ¿no? De hecho, en una de las preguntas, era curioso porque una de las preguntas que nos ponías en el chat hablaba de cuáles son esas few critical things. Y era para otra pregunta, pero la verdad es que el hecho de que esté parafraseado de few critical things, dijimos, creo que a veces no sabemos seleccionarlas. A veces ponemos todo. Y cuando hablamos de prioridad, decimos, ok, tengo que priorizar, bueno, ese es el 1, el 2 y el 3, pero después tienes en tu lista hasta el 1000. Entonces, claro, está en orden, yes, pero hacemos el 1000 completo, ¿no? Y creo que parte de priorizar es despriorizar. O sea, ¿qué vas a dejar de hacer? ¿Qué sale de tu lista? Y esa es en la parte en la que estamos fallando y que va un poco en línea con los challenges actuales que tenemos. Porque muchos de los challenges que el equipo ha mencionado es adaptación a cosas nuevas, hacer más con menos. Entonces, para hacer eso, va a tocar retar cosas de las que hoy hacemos y dejarlas de hacer, sacarlas de nuestra bandeja y de la bandeja de nuestros equipos, y simplemente decir no a algunas cosas, ¿no? Y creo que todos los líderes que estamos aquí, con el contexto que la mayoría ha comentado en sus equipos, esa es una de las cosas principales que nos toca vivir y en la que todavía nos está costando agarrar músculo. No tenemos ese músculo ganado. El decir no, el despriorizar, el quitar cosas, el dejar de hacer cosas, y era algo que me ponía a pensar también.
Yeah, I will tell you, and Britt can tell you, this is the exact conversation we have with the vice presidents, and this is the exact conversations we have with your senior team, which is we love to say yes. We love to say yes, and any opportunity feels like a good one. So we like to say, here's a big list, and then there's some more things that we want to do as well. And so I've been having this very same conversation with Alfredo and his team about we say we need to prioritize, but we love doing stuff. And so how do we make the choice? How do we emphasize those things that are most important? So I think you hit it on the head, Espe, that it is a cultural thing from the top down, is we have got to help people stay focused on the few, not the 12. Please, Brett.
Gracias, Denis. Gracias, Espe. Y a todos, me queda pensando en, este año se ha socializado un documento no sé si para todas las vicepresidencias, pero fue un ejercicio en recursos humanos, yo creo que sí fue en cada vicepresidencia, y en recursos humanos por primera vez había una cajita, ¿no? Sobre el plan estratégico de qué vamos a dejar de hacer. Que me acuerdo que a mí me emocionó un montón al verlo, porque creo que nunca estaba como dentro de las metodologías que se siguen, ¿no? De OGSM o de Balance Scorecard, etcétera, nunca estaba tan explícito el qué vamos a dejar de hacer. Entonces, en esa línea, Denis, mi pregunta sería, tú que has escuchado estas conversaciones, has tenido estas conversaciones y reflexiones con el comité, con los directores, ahora con los gerentes ejecutivos, ¿cuáles crees que podrían ser como siguientes pasos para continuar yendo en esa dirección? ¿Y qué vallas también nos alejan de ir en esa dirección? Porque algo que yo puedo pensar, y creo que nos puede pasar, es si dejo ir esta oportunidad, no sé si voy a seguir creciendo, ¿no? O sea, creo que pueden haber muchas cosas ahí. Entonces, nada, quería saber tu punto de vista al respecto.
De hecho, solo permíteme un paréntesis chiquito, porque yo vi ese mismo formato y tuve la misma emoción, y de hecho lo comentamos. En todas las vicepresidencias se hizo ese formato porque fue el formato para decantar el CP de vicepresidentes. Y hablaba con Estefan, por ejemplo, que es el vicepresidente de Supply Chain, y le decía, ¿y qué tal nos ha ido con esa cajita? ¿No? Porque claro, era un formato y una cajita era, ¿qué dejaremos de hacer? Me decía, bueno, esa cajita todavía no la hemos llenado. Entonces está sensacional, pero es la última cajita que hemos llenado del formato.
Well, Britt, I think you know the answer is first, when we talk about what's not being said, and one of the things that often isn't said is that AliCorp is kind of a hero culture. And that is, we kind of admire people who can pull it out at the last minute, who can just amazingly make it happen, and it's impossible. And so there's a little bit of that, which is some of that's good, but too much of that, it means everything's a stretch and nobody, right, can predict what's going to happen. So part of it is us saying, what are the orthodoxies that we have? And that is, we love to grow, we love to say yes, we do not like to say no. And if we say no, we feel like we're failing, like we're not doing something. And then we reward the people who make amazing efforts and somehow get it done despite the cost to themselves or their teams. And so I think us getting more centered on some of those things and addressing those things, and I promise you, this is a topic of quite some discussion in your leadership. So I don't think that's the answer, but I do think there's some repetition and a cadence about what is the most important thing, what is the most important thing. And then recognizing who we are and what our tendencies are, you know, what we love doing. It's like nobody wants to do more things because they're bad in their intention. It's because we love the growth story and we love to say yes and do some stuff.
Agree.
Good point. I'm glad you picked a messy one here for the end. Thanks, Esperanza. That was. Here's where I'd like us to go next. Let's get this up on the screen. So we're going to put you in your small teams, and then Flor and I are going to give you 30 minutes. And we want you to think about, as a small group, and you'll be in your small group tomorrow, about a playbook. So we've talked about how to navigate difficult change. We've talked about this hard, difficult personal change. We've kicked off with Alvaro talking about the need for personal transformation first. You've got to look at systems level change through the simulation. And you've looked at some examples across AliCorp of our own internal change efforts. So we've seen quite a range of these things. So now's the time for you to think about, knowing what we know now at this moment, how will we plan to lead change in this uncertain future? So how do we lead change in this uncertain future? What can I do, and how will I think about changing my leadership? What's important about leading change today, and how will I change my leadership looking forward? Now, tomorrow, you'll have a chance to work in your groups again a little bit, but you'll be presenting some of your ideas near the end of the VCE tomorrow. And the theme for us is, how do we help people manage large-scale systems change? So when we think about, you know, what's Phoenix now post-launch? When we think about big systems change, and how we help people lead through those. That's kind of the theme. But if you have ideas and thoughts about personal leadership, about what's important for the teams I lead, please bring those as well. So the idea is for you to start consolidating some of the things we've learned in preparation, to give you a little bit of time on your schedule today to do that. And we'll do a little bit more tomorrow so we can talk about those and get our thoughts together. So we'll come back in 30 minutes and then we'll talk a little bit more. Thanks, Laura. About the conversations. We come up with a few things that might be useful for us as we look forward with this little pause that we've had today.
Yes, it was a good reflection space, and it's going to be a big playbook.
A big playbook. Excellent. Well, we'll do the production. We'll bind it. Any observations or thoughts? So here's our deal. Flora, will you pull up the last slide for me, please? Today was some time for us to think about difficult change, to think about some of the ways that we manage that change that feels persistent, that it takes time, but people struggle with the most. And then some strategies on how we might address it. Certainly see it coming and how we might address it. One more slide forward, please. So tomorrow, please read and prepare the TSI case study. If the materials are pretty straightforward, they should be very interesting. And so we're going to have a conversation with an external case, get a little distance from a whole case study. And TSI is a really, I think, a fabulous example of more people thrown at it would not be the answer. So what did they do and how did they go about that? So there's lots to us to take apart. And then keep your notes for the change playbook, and we're going to talk about that in the second half. So that's our story for tomorrow. And Britt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dennis. Gracias, equipo. En verdad estamos terminando algunos minutos antes. Creo que ha sido porque los espacios de pedir su participación o sea, ha sido muy natural, muy proactivo, y les agradecemos muchísimo. Reflexiones también muy importantes, ejemplos realmente necesarios. En el 360 conversábamos con Denis, ¿no? Desde lo funcional, el mindset, o sea, de verdad que excelente, y a seguir conectando puntos para mañana nuestra última sesión. No les robamos más tiempo. Encuentran en Modelo Crece y también en su correo el caso de TSI. Cualquier cosa, si tuvieran dificultad de encontrarlo, me dejan saber y los ayudo. Y nos vemos mañana. Muchas gracias.
Chao.
Bueno,
Gracias.
gracias a todos.